If Boris Johnson wins today, will the last person to leave the UK please turn off the slow cooker?
No, that is not right.
Will the last person to leave the UK put the bins out, grey and green please?
No, that is not correct either.
Will the last person to leave the UK please?
Oh, forget it.
Never mind a certain headline in the Sun newspaper, it is a tricky job framing a leaving note, so easy to get it wrong. Too jocular, and the writer runs the risk it will be misunderstood and haunt them for eternity. See Liam Byrne, former Labour Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and his "I'm afraid there is no money" missive to his coalition government successor. The handover note, part of a tradition going back to before the Second World War, was promptly disclosed by new Prime Minister David Cameron. Never trust a Tory, it is a maxim that holds as good today as it did then. A John Plonker Ashworth, Shadow Health Secretary. Taking the opposite tack, penning a piece that warns of a looming apocalypse, is fraught with danger too. But there was a lot of that about yesterday. In the Herald, Prime Minister Boris Johnson wrote, "Only by voting for the Scottish Conservatives can you end the threat of a second independence referendum for good." Note that for good. Very odd. Does Mr. Johnson have something he wants to share with the room, a plan to suspend democracy the same way he did Parliament? In his comment article, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, "We get them all round these parts," offered the choice of waking up on Friday to a Tory government ready to sell the NHS to Donald Trump, or a Labour administration that would protect and invest in the health service. A decent try, but for a good old-fashioned, end of the world as we know it warning, one has to turn to Nicola Sturgeon. In an open letter published yesterday, the First Minister called Mr. Johnson the greatest danger to Scotland of any Tory Prime Minister in modern times, and said much of what we hold dear in Scotland will be cast aside as Boris Johnson reshapes the UK in his own right-wing Brexiteer image. Not only does this replace Margaret Thatcher with Mr. Johnson as Scotland's official bogeyman, it conjures up a vision last seen in Peter Watkins' once banned drama, The War Game, which speculated on life after a nuclear conflict. I seem to recall the clothes were terrible, sludge-grey rags, and dead rats were sold in markets as food. Ms. Sturgeon was more measured in her article for the Herald, calling today's election the most important in many, many years. The future of Scotland, our NHS, and whether Boris Johnson gets the majority he craves were all on the line, she warned. We shall see whether such messages, and yesterday's crisscrossing of the country by candidates, do the trick. There is an air about this general election that marks it out as different, perhaps because it's I. For more on this story, visit the news article link.